Blood libel works because people are predisposed to believe it. And because its purpose is to trigger the amygdala and start that pogrom, the actual truth or falseness of the underlying story is irrelevant. Consider again the story of the Kishinev pogrom, which we discussed in an earlier video.
Stepped into the building, changes swinging on my neck, gold rings on my fingers, something on my wrist, tucked into my waist, look, see me with a clip, big gloss of the bomb.
When 49 Jews were murdered at an orgy of violence triggered by the belief that the murder of 14-year-old Mikhail Rybachenko, a Christian boy, was somehow tied to rituals carried out by the Jews of Kishinev over the Passover in 1903. If someday some historical researcher or forensic scientist discovers, for example, that Michael Rybachenko was killed in a gangland shooting
Left the name off the list, Alfie.
Did I?
between some Ukrainian gang and some Bessarabian Alfie Solomon,
What's the matter with you, Tommy, eh? Sort of took your boy, did they? Eh? You got your boy?
would that change anything? Does it make the blood libel that started the Kishinev pogrom any less blood libelous? Does it change what we now know the motivations were? Does it change history's judgment of Pavel Khrushchev, the man who, like Sheryl Sandberg, did more than anyone else to spread an amygdala hijacking story, which he may very well believed was true, but which he also must have known he did not have the evidence to be sure was true?
I do think that it took longer than it should have for people to come out and to decry this sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
That statement sounds different now, doesn't it? Now that we know what she did not know when she said that. Now that we know that she, like many other people, simply took someone's word.
With regard to the 7th of October attacks, we found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred in at least 3 locations.
That's the part of Pramila Paten's testimony that you will have seen hundreds of times. Yet the statement is trivial. Of course, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred. Conflict-related sexual violence is so common in our world that there would be grounds to believe it even if there had not been a single claim made. Just as there are reasonable grounds to believe that sexual harassment in elite private schools occurs, even if you don't have any specific allegation to talk about. Chanel Condos' research has quantified just how prevalent it is. Yet when the ABC disclosed information about a very specific allegation from a very specific named individual, testifying herself in her own name in a sworn deposition, an entire media and political establishment felt it was an assault on civilization that someone would even tell you about it.
Now, what grubs they are at the ABC and what grubs the ALP are to recklessly destroy a man's character or reputation on the flimsiest of evidence. Evidence it knew would never stand up in any court of law.
Remember that nobody was calling for Mr. Porter to be taken to court. No one was calling for him to be assassinated or his political allies to be killed. Nobody suggested that the city where he is from should be surrounded, cut off from food, water, medicine, and fuel so that justice be done. Nobody was trying to start a war on the basis of these allegations. The ABC simply thought it was a matter of public interest that these allegations were made and that the police declined to investigate them. The motivating question wasn't Mr. Porter's guilt or innocence, and we, like all Australians, affirm that Mr. Porter deserves the presumption of innocence. But the question of who in Australia is entitled to even be taken seriously.
In other locations, such as Kibbutz Kfar Aza, reported incidents of rape could not be verified.
The material takeaway of Pramila Paten's investigation is not that allegations are credible, because they are by definition credible unless falsified, as was the case with the allegation of beheaded babies, or of babies put in ovens, or of a woman whose breast was severed before she was raped. The material takeaway is that not one single allegation was substantiated in Pramila Paten's investigation. That doesn't mean they weren't true. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. You can't prove a negative. It doesn't mean the witnesses were all liars, or that even one witness was a liar. Although Ms. Sandberg seems to have had particularly bad luck in her choice of whom to highlight in her documentary. It certainly doesn't mean that the testimony of former hostages like Amit Susana, who testified to sexual assault while in captivity, should be disbelieved. But it certainly means that serious people should not talk about allegations that are, at any given moment, indistinguishable from war propaganda, as if they were facts which they knew to be true.
This sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
Because if we are prepared to do that, then what's the difference between us and the mobs of Kishinev? Did they not have a right to defend themselves? What would you do if you were convinced that an alien community was part of a death cult that educated their people to abduct and kill your children? If your answer to that question is any other than, I would really want to make sure it was true before I believed it, and certainly before I spread the allegation, then there is no difference between us and them.
They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
I had just turned 20 when I saw Nayira Al-Sabeh's emotional testimony about Iraqi soldiers. And like most people who were alive then, I absolutely believed it. I believed it because she seemed credible. I believed it because it was the kind of thing I was too young to realize people tell lies about, especially when trying to drum up support for a war. But mostly, I believed it because what she said was the kind of thing I imagined Iraqi men might do. It's unclear why. I had never at that point met anyone from Iraq. I had no basis to believe such a thing. But in my mind, in 1990, the idea of an Iraqi soldier grinning from cheek to cheek, taking a baby out of an incubator and laying him on the ground to die was totally consistent with what I understood about the world. And what I also remember was the rage. The rage I felt when I contemplated that picture. That, my friends, is how blood libel works.
One of the most important parts of journalism when it comes to war is to scrutinize propaganda that comes from every side in every war.
Facts are stubborn things.
The reporting by the New York Times on the alleged mass rape used by Hamas was so bad that they had to cancel a podcast that they were going to do about it.
There was no forensic evidence.
There's no forensic physical evidence. There's no audiovisual evidence.
There was so little to back it up.
Pramila Patten said, we looked at 50 hours of video.
What was necessary was for Israel not to just accurately describe the atrocities that were committed on October 7th, and there were absolutely atrocities on October 7th.
There was body cam, iPhone. 50 hours.
But that wasn't enough. Knowing what the Israelis intended to do in Gaza, they needed the world to believe that this was not just an ordinary attack, that this was done by a kind of evil we had never seen before. Remember, they were describing them as worse than Nazis.
We looked at 5,000 photographs.
Worse than ISIS.
We have no digital or photographic evidence of sexual violence. Those are her words.
The only so-called evidence comes from discredited witnesses.
The only way the Israelis could, and they knew this at the time, justify in people's minds what they were doing and knew they were going to do to Gaza, namely destroy it all.
Gang rapes to the left of me. Gang rapes to the right of me.
Was if they could convince people that the people in Gaza were not really human beings, that they were subhuman.
We're civilized people. We are not like them.
And that's how the Israelis spoke about them from the very beginning.
There's only people who claim they saw something.
The alleged witnesses, they said they were hiding.
Like, if you look at their stories, none of them add up. We've gone over this so many times.
You didn't take out a camera?
And of all the Israeli women who were raped that morning,
there's no identified victims, dead or alive.
Much of the international community does not want to listen to them at all, and certainly doesn't want to believe them.
There's no identified victims.
Well, let me tell you where the victims are. They're dead. They're dead. That is why we called this film, Screams Before Silence.
So name one of them. Name one of these dead victims. The one dead person who was named as a likely victim of Hamas rape was Gal Abdush. Her family denounced the New York Times. They spoke to her right before she was killed and said it was impossible that she was a victim of sexual violence. So if not her, then who?
You're talking about the Sharabi girls, she said. No, they were shot and were not subjected to sexual abuse. The spokesperson also disputed the graphic and highly detailed claims of the Israeli Special Forces paramedic who served as the source of the allegation.
There were no cutting babies out of wombs. There were no baking babies in ovens. These were all absolute lies spread by the Israeli government and their supporters.
Quote, it's not true. They were not sexually abused.
That's what they do.
And the extreme suffering you're about to hear about, including the killing of children, these are not really human beings. These are monsters and mongrels and subhuman.
They have never built anything except something to kill Jews.
And all of these fabricated stories were necessary to do that.
The one thing Israelis are frightened more than anything else, that we become like the Palestinians.
Just like war propaganda of this kind always is designed to accomplish.
They come from a different universe in terms of their values than we do. They're not a version of us.
It's just such an embarrassment. It's just such complete embarrassment for them.
It's also an embarrassment for an entire generation of Western liberal feminists who allowed themselves to be tricked into using the language of feminism like a spoonful of sugar to help the racism go down.
I do think that it took longer than it should have.
If you get to the point where you've let people lose your humanity, relinquish your humanity,
for people to come out and to decry,
cheer for some of the most grotesque acts that human beings are capable of imposing on others, including entire populations of women and children.
The silence on this from too many is deafening.
Now, on the other hand, you have countless stories and allegations of Israelis raping Palestinians.
This sexual violence, which was obviously so grievous.
We have come so far in believing survivors of rape and assault in so many situations.
That got totally ignored.
Anyone with a mother, a sister, a daughter must speak out now to condemn rape.
Then I would suggest that you need to seriously reconsider what it is that you have been led to support.
The number one weapon of the barbarian is our values and the dumb application of our values.